And thank you to Ilana for letting us take a hijack a few minutes of your time just to speak about my mom for a little bit. So anyone who ever knew my mom knew that she was happiest in the kitchen, surrounded by her cookery books and her recipes that she collected from magazines. She looked forward to preparing Seder nights for 15, 20 people, only cooking on Erev Pesach, starting at 3 in the morning and finishing as Pesach came in because nothing could come from the freezer. She looked forward to hosting her friends for dinner parties on Sunday nights, and she loved preparing. She loved thinking about it. She loved cooking and giving and sustaining other people. And she looked forward to preparing for every single Shabbos and every single Yom Tov. Whenever we would arrive from Israel, whether it be 3 or 4 in the morning, obviously the table would be set and there would be soup ready for us and hot chocolate on the table, because who would think about going to bed at 3 in the morning? You may as well come. And mom needed to give us, as soon as we arrived, she needed to provide for us. It couldn't be that we would go to bed without receiving her sustenance before we went off to bed and got up and then just carried on getting more of the same as the trip went on. When she passed away, Tisha B'Av 2 years ago, she'd already planned her guest lists for Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot. It was already planned. Her meals were planned and her shopping lists were done. She was so looking forward to the Chagim and the Yom Tovs that were coming that it was obvious that this would be done already, because there's nothing that you would more look forward to than preparing and wanting to give to other people. So as I look around at the faces that are here and I see that, I see the bushy faces. My mom wasn't in Bushy for very long. She was, I think it was 10 years, and she made some wonderful, wonderful friends. So that really is a merit to Bushy Shul, that you opened your hearts and you opened your house and your homes to my parents, and I appreciate that very much. And also I can see some of my mom's old friends, and I think that it's also a merit to my mom and her friends that they were able to keep friendships up for 50 years, which is an amazing, amazing thing. And I can see my friends here from Israel and from England. And so I thank you very much for your support over the last 2 years. Like I said on Shabbat, if we don't have such a big family, we need to rely more. And before I hand over to Ilana, one last wish is that I wish that my mom's memory be a blessing. And that next time we're standing in the kitchen and we are preparing for that 3-day special English Chag, where you have 3 days where you have to prepare for, just think of my mom, and we should realize that it is a privilege to have a family to cook for. It is a blessing to have the food to cook, and it is an honor to clear up after the people who enjoyed our food so much. My mom definitely had that way of looking at it. So next time your feet are killing you in the kitchen, just think about my mom, and we should enjoy the memories that we have of her. זהו, שתהא נשמתה צרורה בצרור החיים. Ilana.
Thank you so much, Dawn, and we're all thinking of you and all the family as well at this time.
Thank you.
I guess I'm starting. Wow. Jacqueline, Rebbetzen Jacqueline, can you make sure I could share screen at some point?
Yes, I will.
Amazing. So in about like 10-15 minutes, we'll share screen. But let me start. Firstly, incredible to see so many people from Israel. If I were you, I'd be fast asleep. So I'm completely impressed. It's lovely to see old faces and new faces. And it's a real honor. Your mom sounds like she's my kind of person. I'd rather be in the kitchen than anywhere else. But I do love history almost as much as I love food. So being able to put them together, especially in the honor of someone who seemed to enjoy food and cooking as much as I do, is a really beautiful opportunity for me. So thank you for that. I'm going to take us down a little bit of a dark path, but I promise you it's going to end up somewhere really, really wonderful. So stick with me while we go there. Actually, my sister-in-law, Tamara, who lives in Alon Shvut, is on the call. And after Jacqueline and I spoke on Friday, I actually put a note on my family chat asking them what they thought about a particular line in Eicha. I'm going to read the line. I told you it's a bit of a dark path, but stick with me. The line goes as follows. The hands of compassionate women boiled their own children. They have become their food in the destruction of the daughter of my people. It's a terrible line from Eicha. When Yirmiyahu writes Eicha, he tries to describe starvation in the most horrific way possible. And I asked my family, do you think it's literal or do you think it's a metaphor? And we got a lot of great answers. Tamara's kids, who are far more knowledgeable than the rest of the kids in the family, like swept in, and everyone had a thought. And it was my nephew Elchanan who said, read the word compassionate. It says the compassionate women, Hanashim Rachmaniyot. And the word rachamim, which is an interesting word to put there, these were the women who were boiling their children. It makes no sense unless you think about the word rachamim. The source of the word is the same source as the word rechem, which means womb. So is there a connection between the womb and compassion? And are they feeding? It got very confusing. Then my nephew Akiva said something. He said, it is the reverse of nature. What Yirmiyahu is trying to show us is the complete reversal. A woman would never eat her child. He's trying to show how terrible the destruction is. A Kohen is going to be killed, lose his life in the Beit HaMikdash. The woman would go as far as eating her child. So I looked for cases in history. Did it ever get to that point, this horrible, horrific image? And I couldn't find them. Thank God, I couldn't find them. So I want to lead us through two instances in history where food and women connect, and how these women really stand out as, superheroes. And what I want to start with is a woman's role in Jewish society. This is controversial, I know, but as Judaism begins to form thousands of years ago, men and women have different roles within Judaism. The men take these public leadership roles, and the women don't. And I'm not going to get into the whys and the correct or incorrectness of it. It's just the way Judaism sets itself up. And much of what happens actually sets women up to be the leaders. As the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash happens, Judaism moves from being a temple-based religion to being a home-based religion. If you think about Shabbat and the Chagim, how much of it happens at home? It's a huge portion of the Jewish way of life happens in the house. And women imbue things which are very practical with meaning. From the foods we serve to the way we serve it. We just heard Dawn telling us about her mother preparing for Chag, her joy in celebrating Seder with 15 or 20 people. And it goes beyond that physical act of putting food on the table. Food emphasizes the strength of women to be the leaders in their home. And the role they play within their family. The savvy and the intelligence it takes not just to run a home, but to pass that down is huge. There weren't cookbooks, there weren't TV shows. Everything you learned about your home, you learned from your mother. The reason many of us know how to keep a Jewish home is because our mothers taught us. And it's an incredible privilege. And then if you think about the amount of times Jews have been persecuted, the amount of instances of anti-Semitism, you start understanding that this was an even harder challenge. How do we keep our homes Jewish? How do we keep on educating our children so they carry this on? There weren't yeshivas, there weren't day schools, all these things that we rely on to help educate our children weren't happening. Education happened at home. I tell people, and this is astounding to me, when a baby is born, they come out with only one fully formed sense, and that's the sense of smell. That's it. Their only fully formed sense is the sense of smell. They smell Shabbat long before anyone takes them to shul. They've smelled challah and chicken soup before anyone's taught them a single, prayer. You've given them a piece of challah to gum at the table. How many of us have pulled vegetables out of a chicken soup and mashed it up? You're literally feeding your children Judaism. And it's the most incredible thing we do. And what happens is during times of struggle, that's when women really come into their own. When things are good and things are easy, that's fine. And, we chug along and we do what we have to do. It's during times of struggle that you really see the strength. So I want to focus a little bit on the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition, and I hate to do exactly what many people have done before me, we lump 500 years of history into like one thing all together, and we say, that's the Spanish Inquisition. And there's so much to learn from it. Everything we know about modern Judaism starts during the Spanish Inquisition. But I'm going to do what many people have done before me. I'm going to lump it into one big chunk of time. But let's just focus on a short bit of it, just to understand what the Spanish Inquisition is about and how deeply it affects women. Jews settle in Spain in the 1st century of the Common Era. They're probably brought there as slaves after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. 100,000 Jews are taken from Judea, settled around the Roman Empire, and one of the places is in Spain. They're there long before Islam or Christianity become part of Spain. The numbers really vary humongously. Anywhere between 200 and 500,000 Jews live in Spain in the 1390s. In 1391 is the first massive massacre that happens as the Christian rulers take over more and more of Spain. They start driving the Jews out. They start giving the Jews an option. You can either convert or you can leave. Those are the options, convert or leave. And many Jews choose to convert. Don't think of this as the, easy way out. It isn't. There are very few places in the 15th century Jews can go to. When they're accepted into the Ottoman Empire, it's 100 years later. So there are very few options. Conversion is actually one of the easier options to take in this entire very messy situation. In case you think the Spanish Inquisition kind of disappeared during the Renaissance, it's officially taken off the book. I have the date here, 16th of December 1968. My mom is on this call, and she was a married lady by the time this is taken off the books. So that's how recent the Spanish Inquisition was still on the books of Spain. It's incredible. But this is where most of our misunderstanding happens. The Inquisition isn't looking for Jews. By the time the Inquisition is taken hold, there are supposedly no Jews left in Spain, right? They've either converted or they've left. The total number of Jews there should be in Spain after 1492, a few days before Tisha B'Av, 1492 is that there should be 0 Jews in Spain. What the Inquisition does is it looks for Jews and it puts out a list. It's the most incredible thing you've ever seen. You want to know what the Jews ate? The Inquisition told you. It said if you see people eating any of the following things, they may be a Jew. So if you see people eating eggplants, chickpeas, olive oil, coriander, saffron, fried desserts, a mixture of savory dishes that have hints of fruit or sweetness in them, foods cooked in olive oil, or anything that's generally spiced, they may be a crypto-Jew. A Marrano, which is a pejorative term, which is why I don't use it. It means swine in Spanish, but letting you guys know, let's not use that word. But it's, you know, I just read to you a list of what Spanish cuisine is nowadays, but then it was the worst thing you could imagine. If someone is cooking and you see the absence of things like lard, pork, eels, or seafood, they may be a Jew. If you see someone who keeps the Shabbat by cooking on a Friday, cuts the sciatic nerve from the hind quarter of an animal, upon the death of a parent, that they eat boiled eggs or olives, that they soak meat in water to draw out the blood. Anyone who celebrates during Easter by eating unleavened bread or eating lettuce or any other bitter herb. Look out for people who don't eat pork, rabbits, birds of prey, cuttlefish, scaled fish, or those who eat meat during Lent. It's the most incredible list of things you could ever imagine. And then the Spanish create a dish, which I'm sure many of you have made, if not tasted. I'm sure you've made the kosher version, which is called paella, right? Have you had it? Massive dish filled with rice. The non-kosher version has bits of sausage in it and seafood. In Spanish villages, they would make these massive, big, humongous pots of paella. And if you were found not eating it, it would be the shibboleth. It would be the thing that pointed you out as being different to everyone else in the village, and they may accuse you of being a Jew. So it's the craziness. And I want to read to you a report from the Inquisitor's notes. The Inquisitors took the most incredible notes. I mean, amazing notes. All of what I read to you was from the Inquisitor's notes of what they told people to look out for. So in the Register of Deposition before the Inquisitor on the island of Canary on the 4th of July, 1570, now this is almost 100 years after the Jews are expelled, Ana Gonzalez deposes that when she was in the service of Ana de Del Monte, she saw that her mistress cooked mutton with oil and onions. She understood this is the Jewish dish adafina. She went on to say that she heard that Ana de Belmonte is of the Jewish race. During the Inquisition, the single most incriminating dish in connection to Judaizing was cholent. If you were caught cooking on a Friday, onions and meat and beans together, you probably were making cholent, and therefore you were probably a Jew. If you go to Madrid nowadays, don't, because Spain is now, you know, not allowed anymore. They'll get stuck, quarantine. They have this dish that looks just like a cholent. It's crazy. It's filled to the brim with every single piece of pork you could imagine. It's got ears in it. It's got trotters in it. It's got it's got a tail in it. Every bit of pork. They created a cholent that was the most unkosher cholent they can. And you had Jews frying bacon on their doorstep to show you how not Jewish they were. Anyone who's ever been to Spain and seen these humongous hawks of pork hanging in the doorway of the butcher shop, this is where the custom starts, to inform you that the person behind that hawk of ham wasn't Jewish. This was a real fear. But women kept on incriminating themselves over and over and over. They couldn't stop cooking the foods their mother taught them. They didn't know how else to pass down their religion. Men weren't getting brisses anymore. There was no identifying Jewish factor. The only thing they had was their food, and that's why they kept on cooking it. This woman, Ana del Monte, living in the island of Canary, is cooking cholent 100 years after her people have converted. It's an incredible testament to the power of food to keep people Jewish. So we're gonna skip there a few hundred years and take you to the Shoah. I told you, we're gonna go to a dark place, but we're gonna come right back from it, I promise. So let's share screen. Jacqueline, nod that you could see the picture. Excellent. So what I'm showing you here is a picture of the Warsaw Ghetto and a soup kitchen in the Warsaw Ghetto. I know it sounds incredible that they had soup kitchens in the Warsaw Ghetto, but they did. Let me tell you the calorie breakdown. Germans allotted themselves 2,613 calories a day. The Center for Human Nutrition at UCLA states that eating less than 1,000 calories a day has the same physical effect as total starvation. So anything less than 1,000, anyone who's been on a diet knows this for sure, you feel like you're starving. The Germans allotted the average non-Jewish Pole 699 calories a day, and the Jew was allowed at 184 calories. It is a shocking number. 184 calories is half a Mars bar. It's that one stick of the Twix and not both of them. That's how much 184 calories is. To survive the ghetto, you needed a soup kitchen, you needed the 184 calories, but above and beyond that, you needed people smuggling food to get into the ghetto. This is a picture I came across recently, which really shocked me. It's a colorized picture of the Lodz ghetto, and these are Jewish little boys waiting online at a soup kitchen. The color makes it really shocking. But here's the other picture. These are women climbing over the wall of the Warsaw Ghetto. You could tell because they're wearing skirts to actually get to the other side to smuggle in food. Why women? Why not men, right? Surely a man is stronger, braver. No. The women were the ones who snuck out of the Warsaw Ghetto to collect food. And the reason was twofold. The firstly is not easily identifiable as Jewish. Men were identifiable. And secondly, most of the women in Poland were actually educated in secular studies. They were educated to be typists and nurses and tailors. Therefore, they were educated amongst Poles and didn't have a thick Yiddish accent that often gave away the men. So the women could blend into society a little bit more. What does resilience look like? It's the women who held back food from themselves to feed their children. Chaim Katz, who lived through the Warsaw Ghetto and is one of its great historians, said that they would catch their mother not eating her food and sneaking it onto one of the kids' plates, and they would have to force her to eat. Women don't boil their children, they feed their children. There's nothing that's gonna stop a woman from feeding her child. But we know the ghettos were liquidated. We know that the women were taken to camps. The ones who didn't go straight to the death camps, the ones who survived years of starvation, years of ghetto, and found themselves in concentration camps or labor camps, often found themselves completely alone. This is a pretty famous picture. It comes from the Auschwitz album. And I don't know if you can see where my cursor is, but this woman is called Eva Newman. She's actually the grandmother of one of mine and Rebbetzen Jacqueline's friends, someone Rebbetzen Jacqueline grew up next door to. So it's incredible that we know who's standing in the picture. By the time the women get to the camps, they're completely alone. They've lost their mothers and their daughters and their sisters. They don't know the person standing next to them. We assume, you know, the person standing next to them is someone they don't. In fact, they don't even recognize each other because they don't look like themselves anymore. And what happens is, unlike men, and I've had the opportunity of interviewing many men and women who are survivors, they survive in different fashions. The women were worked just as hard as the men. And when they came back to the bunks, instead of moaning, they would talk about recipes. This is something women have done, you know, for time immemorial. The recipes represented a warmth of life they didn't have in the camps. They represented the phenomenon of giving. Dawn so aptly described her mother as such a giver. That's what recipes do. They give. They represent being concerned with your family's welfare. What am I going to feed my family? It's an imperative of faith. Every time I tell you about my chicken soup, my gefilte fish, I'm telling you who I am and where I come from. And it's a demonstration of love. We couldn't express our love any more fully than cooking for our families. And what happens is some of these women risk life and limb to write down these recipes. And I want to introduce you to a few of them. So this is Vali Kohn. Vali is born in Czechoslovakia in 1918, and she lives in Prague with her husband Ewald. In July of 1943, Vali, her mother and her husband are taken to Theresienstadt. In October of 1944, with many other people from Theresienstadt, she's taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and her mother doesn't survive the selection. She does. Several weeks later, she's sent to all of these camps, by the way, had many sub-camps. So she's sent to a sub-camp of Mauthausen in the Austrian Alps. And there, she starts writing recipes on scraps of paper. So I'll read to you what she wrote. After a day of work, we returned to the barracks. We were very tired, and I wrote about food. What somebody said was best. We ate with our thoughts. I recorded what others said about food recipes. We wrote about food all night. I wrote on whatever I could find. I wrote on a photograph of Hitler. Let me just show you. This is a piece of paper she found on the ground, and this is what shocks the living daylights out of me. Hold on, I'll stop sharing so that if anyone wants to say something, you can. She found a piece of paper of propaganda with Hitler on it, and she subsequently writes a recipe around it, a recipe for almond crescents. And you can see there isn't much written there, but she holds on to that paper after she's liberated, after she gets back home, after she finds out that her husband is murdered in the camps. She still holds on to that paper. I can't figure out why. And I've been giving this talk for a while, and I still don't know why Vali holds on to that piece of paper with Hitler's face on it. It boggles the mind. And I guess the recipe was more important to her than this atrocious person. And it's like, I think because, thank God, we've never been in that situation, we can't really understand what prompted her to hold on to the paper. Let's go back to sharing screen. So the next lady, this is Trudy Kasowitz, and Trudy is born in 1907 in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and she lived with her husband in Vienna. When she is deported to Birkenau and separated from her husband, she works at Commando Canada, actually the same place where Eva Newman, our friend's grandmother, worked. Canada is where they sorted through other Jews' goods, and they took a humongous amount of wealth, and the Nazis gained a tremendous amount from it. She said, I pretend to visit someone as her guest, and she pretended to serve me coffee and cake. She would share a recipe and I would write it down. We did this to overcome our sense of hunger. Her husband and parents were murdered in the camps. Trudy passed away in 2002 in America. And here are the notes. She also, like Vali, held on to these for years afterwards. And you can see there's a tort here. This is another type of cookie. She wrote them down. What's interesting to me about Trudy's recipe book is that she used barbed wire in order to fasten it together. You could see the rust left from it. It's a crazy, crazy thing to understand. This is Yehudit Aufrichting, who was born in Hungary in 1914. She emigrated to Amsterdam in 1938, and she works as a beautician in Amsterdam. She's actually a beautician for the Hungarian ambassador's wife to the Netherlands. And this woman manages to get her a passport that doesn't identify her as a Jew. That she's able to work as a resistance fighter in the Dutch resistance, and she's able to get food to many of the Jews in hiding around Amsterdam until she's betrayed by one of the people hiding one of the Jewish families. And she is taken to Ravensbrück, and she works at the Siemens factory. And she says this: "We had low quality white paper. We took out a large sheet and folded it into small pieces. I brought a thread and a needle and sewed it so that it would not come apart, and we wrote in it. I will never forget how a Dutch woman told me, 'I have a pearkugel, write it down.' I replied, 'I've never eaten it, so I don't long for it.' She insisted, but it would give me such a pleasure to talk about it. So I did her a favor and noted it down. The objective was to satiate our need for food. If you're hungry, you don't care about anything but food." So Trudy goes ahead and does this woman this humongous favor. Using a piece of paper, had she been caught with the paper, she would have been killed for damaging German property. And she writes down another woman's pearkugel recipe, even though she'd never had it. But for the woman, there's a possibility that this pearkugel recipe will survive long after she has been, she has passed away of malnutrition or been murdered. And it's this amazing testimony to the way women work together. And here is one of her recipes. This is actually incredible. Judith, one of her friends, writes her an entire menu. There are 7 courses. Judith was ill, and her friend came to visit her. And at the bottom it says, at the top it says, "I'm so sorry you were ill. While you were away, we ate all this beautiful food, but we saved you a little crust of bread from our meal," kind of making fun of their situation. So out of all these recipes, we know that there are 6 in existence today. We're called fantasy cookbooks. That's 6 cookbooks at least that are written by women, Jewish women in the camps. This is the Ravensbrück cookbook, written in 1945. It sits in a display in the Sydney Museum of the Holocaust. It sits amongst all these other paraphernalia: a brush, a comb, someone's eyeglasses, someone's house keys, everything that was taken away and destroyed. This is something that's actually created by a Jew, for a Jew, amongst Jews in a camp. It's incredible to think there's something's being created and not destroyed in this camp. It's written by a 16-year-old. Her name is Edith Peer. When she's 16, she's taken to Ravensbrück. She's separated from her entire family. She comes originally from Hungary, and she's sitting alone and terrified and lost in this bunker with lots and lots of women. And she hears them talking about food. She says that when she got to the camp, the only thing she knew how to make was how to boil water. By the time she leaves, she feels she knows how to cook everything. She heard the women talking about food, sharing food, and she proceeded to write down 97 recipes that she had heard. Of the 97, this is a 16-year-old girl, over half of them are desserts. They're for cakes and trifles and biscuits and creams. She has desserts for observing holidays, desserts for celebrations, desserts to indulge. And then the food she writes are also just as rich. She writes a recipe for goulash and potatoes, stuffed cabbage, paprika fish, and then more desserts. Edith can't get enough of them. This is just Ravensbrück, and this is what the front cover of the cookbook looks like. She went ahead and painted a little picture on it. Our last story happens in Theresienstadt. But before Theresienstadt, I want to take you, the year is 1969, and Amy Stern is living in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She receives a phone call, and the person on the other end of the line says, are you Amy Stern? And she says, yes, I am. And he says, I have a package for your mother, from your mother. Her mother had been dead for 25 years. She couldn't understand what was happening. And he says, I'm a survivor, and your mother, before she died, gave me a package. I've been looking for you for 25 years. So let me tell you how this starts. Mina Pratchett is living in Czechoslovakia. She's in her 60s. She has a daughter and a grandson. The daughter and the grandson are able to run away to Palestine in 1939. Mina is not as fortunate, and she's taken to Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt is built on a former Czech barrack, about an hour's drive from Prague. And what's unique about it, as opposed to other camps, it's the Nazi model camp. And it has rich Jews. It has Jews that the Nazis would have had a hard time explaining what had happened to them. Amongst them, Leo Beck and Viktor Frankl. They have prominent war veterans. You know, Germany had a humongous amount of Jews who fought in World War I who were decorated war veterans. How are you going to explain their disappearance? And they had artists and intellectuals, professors and musicians. Had Sigmund Freud not escaped to England, he would have been amongst them. Same for Albert Einstein escaping to America. Theresienstadt wasn't a killing center, but so many people died of malnutrition that they had to build a crematorium to deal with the amount of people dying. This model camp, they put out a movie, the Theresienstadt movie. It shows an orchestra. It was used as publicity to show how well the Nazis were treating the Jews. In the movie, you see this scene of people walking down the road. They had a cafe where no food was ever served. They had dining room number 2. Again, no food ever served, and dining room 1 didn't exist. They had a bank, which no transaction ever happened in. One of the things that tells us so much about what it means to be a Jew is that the Jewish Council started enacting triage rationing. They decided that they were going to feed the children and the strong people and not the elderly. They were concerned, and rightly so, that there wasn't enough food to go around. The elderly were giving their food to the younger people, making the elderly, like Mina, destined to die of malnutrition. So Mina and her friends proceeded to write a cookbook. They wanted to ensure that their stories through their recipes were handed down. Of the 144,000 Jews in Theresienstadt, 33,000 died. 88,000 were sent to Auschwitz. By the end of the war, 19,000 are left, and of which only 100 were children. So Mina knew what she was doing. So just before she died, she finished compiling this cookbook, and she gave it to this man and said, please find my daughter and get it to her. Annie Stern received this package. It took her 10 years until she was able to open it, which I think we can all understand. When she opened the package, she found this picture on top. It's her mother, Mina Pratchett, with her son. And inside, she found a note from her mother and a cookbook, which her mother had lovingly put together. As I said, we were going to go somewhere very dark, but I want to bring you somewhere much happier. I think that one of my jobs is taking groups to Poland. And this is the story I want to tell the women when I get an opportunity, because the way women survive is so different to the way men do it. Their joie de vivre comes from looking after each other and looking after others. It's an incredible testament to how brave they are, how full on they will look after their people. So when Eicha tells us about these women who boil their children, I have to believe it's a metaphor of the world turning upside down, because history shows us that women will always look after their own. The torchbearers, the carriers of Judaism are women, and we have this incredible ability to bring people together in our homes through our cooking and through our teaching. So I think, as Rebbetzen Jacqueline said, Dawn, it was a real bashert that I had the opportunity to speak to your mother, that I'm guessing exemplifies many of these qualities of wanting to nurture people in every way possible. Please feel free to ask me questions, ask Dawn questions about her mom, ask Rebbetzen Jacqueline questions. We are open. I think you could probably unmute yourself.
So just to say a really big thank you to Ilana. How fitting to have this special evening that, as I said, wasn't meant to happen, but I think really has put us in the right framework for the week ahead. It's, as you said, it's a difficult week we're going to be facing now. It's the darkest point in our history, but the strength of women who came before us, I think, really teaches us so much. And I think it's such a fitting way for us all to be remembering Frida and to be thinking of Dawn, you and Jolien and your dad Leslie and all the family at this time. So if there is anyone who would like to comment, please feel free to do so.
I like it when I silence everyone. But it's really nice to see one of my oldest friends. Hi, Karen.
It's nice for me to see Karen.
It's a small world, isn't it?
Dawn, were we able to capture a bit of your mom in this?
Yeah, definitely. Someone just gave me a reminder, a memory of my mom, talking about, you know, putting down your recipes and wanting to pass them on. So I recently found many handwritten recipes that my mom wrote for me when I made Aliyah, the things that she thought that I would be able to make, because I wasn't allowed in the kitchen growing up, so I couldn't cook until I got married. So she wrote the recipes. It was before email, I guess. Like, she wrote them down. So I have a whole bunch of her recipes. And one amazing thing that my mom used to do, someone just reminded me, was that she would write down what she'd served guests, so that when they came back, she wouldn't give them the same thing again. So she had lists of what everyone ate, in order that they wouldn't have the same thing again, which is amazing. My kids do the same thing.
I bet you do that, Dawn.
No, I don't do that. My kids do the same thing, I don't care. But my mom did that. It was amazing.
My parents moved to London in 1992, and one of my mother's friends, actually, that she met, she's like, it's amazing. She writes it all down on an index card. And when I got married, I was like, I'm going to do that. I lasted 1 week. And that was it. Yeah. Like, people will just be okay if they're served the same thing.
Of course.
I think one of the really incredible things about speaking about the power of women at this time is that, you know, we as we said, we're approaching Tisha B'Av, which is the saddest time in our year, but please God, is going to turn into a Yom Tov. And, you know, hopefully this year we've gone through so much. Please God, that will be, that this year we can all be celebrating on Tisha B'Av. But we really do say that it's in the merit of the great women that we are going to be redeemed. So, you know, the things that we all learned from Frida, you know, when we're thinking about what should we cook before the fast, or what should we break the fast on to do this with joy, I think is really, that's when we talk about the zachut that we have, for sure.
Lindy, go ahead.
Hello, lovely to see you, Rebbetzen and Ilana.
Hi.
And also Dawn, thank you so much for talking about your mother so beautifully. I found your talk absolutely fascinating, and in my family, food was always the most important thing. I remember my mother used to say, when I didn't want to eat something when I was a child that I really didn't like, she said, if you love me, eat it. So I had to eat it. I had to eat it. And that lives with me. But the thing I wanted to mention that perhaps links with an experience I had, I went to Auschwitz about 4 years ago. And in one of the huts where those terrible glass cases are filled with glasses and hair and all those things that we've seen that are so horrific, At the end of that room, there was a big case filled with cooking utensils and baking utensils, because the women carried those things to Auschwitz. They didn't know what the end was going to be for them, but they carried those things with them because they were so intrinsic to their way of life. And if they had any hope that they might have a life in the East, which was what they were told, they had to have their cooking and baking utensils with them. And I found that so incredibly moving, and I shall never forget that. And I just wanted to share it with you.
Isabella is raising her hand, and then Alan and Kathy. Isabella, wherever you are. Okay, so Alan and Kathy it is. We can't hear you. You're gonna have to turn up the volume on your computer. There you
go. That sounds good.
Sorry, Kathy, maybe type it on the chat.
Sorry, Kathy, there's something up with your sound. If you want to try maybe disconnect and reconnect. Isabella, did you want to unmute yourself and say something, or should I unmute you? I'll try unmute you, Isabella, if you want to say something. No. Okay.
All right, so if anyone has a question or you want to get in touch with me, you could do through Rebbetzen Jacqueline. Thank you all. Dawn, I wish you and your brother and your dad a very long life.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebbetzen and Ilana. And please God, we should all be able to meet up in person very soon and to be able to spend good times together, and for all the amazing, incredible things that you do.
Take care,
Thanks
everyone.
for coming. Thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Stay
Stay safe.
well.